Hi everyone! Alright, I'm back with a second video in my new episode in life, and I want to talk to you about a book I just recently finished called The Healing Power of the Sun by Richard Hobday, PhD. This book was very impactful. So we are taking a radical direction shift from essential oils, only in the sense that we're talking about the sun, which is the source of energy and life and light on this planet. Of course, they feed the plants that get distilled to make our essential oils. Without the sun, we would be nowhere. You know it. I know it. I'm not telling you anything new. But this book is fascinating, and I just want to give a quick account of it here. Highly recommend any of you who are into natural medicine and God's healing design. I know you know about things like probably grounding and earthing, which we'll talk about in another video. We know about fresh air, we know about plant medicine, herbs, and energy medicine, and all these different cool things that God has made. This book in particular really details the power of the sun, and in threefold manner. One, how does, they call it heliotherapy, or sun therapy. What is man's relationship to it throughout history and the history of medicine? Secondly, what is the relationship of the sun with the history of architecture, which of course I went to school for architecture, so that's just like fascinating to me. And then thirdly, just what does it actually do for our physical body? So I want to try to dive into that as simply as possible and just kind of break down those three pieces in this video if I can. In 10 minutes or less. So essentially mankind, we've had the sun since the dawn of existence, right? We would not exist without it. And obviously, when you go back into ancient cultures, there was a huge amount of sun worship, whether you're looking at ancient Egypt, any culture really. The sun was always a deity. And of course, the Bible tells us that they've exchanged the worship of the creator for the creation, which is exactly what people did. And so I'm not saying that sun worship was good. What I'm saying is I understand why they did. And why they did is because of the properties of the sun, right? It gave them warmth. It gave life. It nourished their crops. It was energizing. But more than that, ancient medical transcripts tell us very clearly that they knew the sun was healing and therapeutic to them. They would expose wounds to the sun. They would expose their skin. They knew that the sun made them feel energized. It made them feel healthy and whole. To this very day, if you have a dog, have you never seen her go out or he go outside and just lay out, even on a hot day, and just sit and sunbathe? Horses, cattle, deer, cats. An indoor cat will find that sliver of sunlight and plunk himself down in it. Why? Because the sun is energizing and it's life-giving and it's therapeutic in all of its forms. And I think it's very interesting how modern culture has so demonized the sun and told us that it's dangerous. We need to stay out of it. We're going to get skin cancer. We have to slather ourselves with these toxic chemicals to keep the sun off of us. Oh my goodness, I'm getting a call. All right. Spam call. Love that. I always forget to turn my notifications off before I hit a video. I should really remember that. Because I get totally blown off track as to what I was talking about. So I want to get into a little bit the history of sun therapy because I really find it fascinating. So we kind of talked about the ancient cultures, and there's all kinds of established literature of people using the power of the sun for all kinds of different healing. And if we go back into more recent history, obviously, I know you've seen pictures of the sanatoriums where they would have these rows of beds. They would wheel patients out and put them in the sunlight. Of course, it was used for healing tuberculosis back in the day when people were having just these consumption and all these issues in their lungs, and it would spread to their body and their bones. One disease that they knew was definitively caused by lack of sunlight, especially in industrialized Europe, was called rickets, and that's from an extremely low vitamin D deficiency leading to deformity of the bones and all kinds of muscle atrophy, terrible, basically a wasting away disease that was very easily healed and cured by sunlight. It had to be sunlight within moderation of a certain duration, repeated over a period of time. So we're talking about therapeutic principles. And let me just pull back a little bit and just talk about how like Western allopathic medicine doesn't believe in therapeutic principles. They believe in like a sledgehammer approach. You're going to take a pill for every ill, or we're going to give you a surgery, we're going to cut something out or slice something together, and we're going to do these like radical, drastic interventions that like lurch the body into some sort of response. And in some occasions that's necessary, right? If I get in a car wreck and I break something, I need somebody to put me back together again, put the hinge back together again, you know, mechanically speaking. But when it comes to healing, that's a therapeutic process. That's a process that needs to be done low and slow over time. And as a fast-paced culture of modernity, we don't have the patience for that. And I can point to examples within my own family of things that need to be healed, and nobody wants to do the work that it takes to heal because it takes time, it takes intentionality, it takes effort, and you're not going to see the fruit of your labor until some point down the road. So starting it now is difficult. It's like if you're 400 pounds and you want to lose weight, it's hard to know now and understand truly in your heart of hearts that like doing this day after day is actually going to pay off. You're not going to see the difference for a couple of years. And it's similar with these therapeutic things like the sun. Of course, a couple of years is very long, but it's going to be weeks to months. And so it's fascinating to understand how there's kind of been this ebb and flow of using the sun as therapy, and then it would go away again, and then they would become popular again. And there's been a push-pull between the powers in history. We had the Industrial Revolution that forced everybody indoors into darkness and smog and misery, and they never saw sunlight. It pushed everybody into cities. Then they had the window tax that happened in the Americas and in Europe, and the glass tax. So people were boarding up their windows and bricking them in. I'm sure you've seen those historic buildings where there's like, there used to be a window there, but it's all full of bricks. The reason they did that is because they got taxed on every window that they had in their building. So people were closing themselves into darkness. They were working in darkness. They were living in darkness. Terrible, cramped, unsanitary conditions, no fresh air, no light, rampant for disease. And so then sunlight therapy was rediscovered. We need to get people out in the countryside, and they need the fresh air. Tuberculosis, same thing. So we've had these rushes throughout history where people have rediscovered the power of the sun. They used to take patients out and expose festering wounds to the sunlight because the sunlight is actually very proven to be antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial, we'll just say. And so some of these like gangrenous wounds and things that were just getting all putrid and nasty under the damp moisture of a plaster or under a bandage, they would take it out and gently over time expose it to the sun so it would dry out, and the sun's rays would kill all of that festering bacteria in the wound. It's amazing what the sun can do. There have been studies that link sunlight. Obviously, we know about vitamin D. And a quick word about skin color. The way that it works is the darker your skin, the more melatonin you have, the more sun you need to get to a certain vitamin D level than a person with lighter skin. And the reason why is because the original population that God designed, from the beginning of time, was that the people with darker skin have all of that melanin to protect them from the harmful rays of the sun so they can be in the sun longer because they live near the equator. And the further north and south you go, people have lighter skin because they don't get as much sunlight. And so therefore, when they are exposed, they absorb, or their body starts making vitamin D more quickly. That's just a scientific fact. And so now our populations are all interspersed and all over the place. So it becomes quite complicated for a dark-skinned person who's living in Norway or England to get adequate vitamin D exposure because their skin is just not prepared for that low levels of sunlight. And vice versa, if you take a person like me and send me to the equator, I cannot spend as much time in the sun because it's going to be too intense for my skin. So anyways, but the point is that vitamin D, as we know, does all kinds of things for the immune system. It does incredible things for your bones and bone density and healing of tooth decay. It does amazing things for your insulin levels. Diabetics, did you know, who spend a lot of time in the sun have to actually keep a more intentional check on their insulin because their metabolic rates change in the sunlight. All of our metabolic rates change in the sunlight. And so you can actually decrease the amount of insulin necessary by being in the sun more. Sunlight exposure and sunlight therapy has been linked to all kinds of things from preventing colon cancer and pancreatic cancers and breast cancers and just all kinds of things. especially skin cancer. And I find that fascinating because the bulk of the studies that have been done in the world is that malignant melanomas, which is the most deadly form of skin cancer, do you know who gets them primarily in the world? People who have no exposure to the sun. And do you know where they get these melanomas on their body? Areas of their body that never see sunlight. So it's very, very interesting how lack of sunlight has caused all kinds of debilitating diseases, including, like we talked about, rickets. And this has been shown time and again in the history of mankind. What happened in the 1950s was the rise of antibiotics. At the same time, we're talking now architecture. Like I said, they used to brick up the buildings and tax the glass. Then we had Florence Nightingale come, and she was like the open air hospitals and all those, pictures, lovely pictures you see of all those beds laying out in the sun. There was a resurgence of sun therapy. They needed fresh air and light in the hospitals, and people were making these resounding recoveries from terrible war wounds and all kinds of disease during that season. But then the 1950s came along. Architecture shifted back again because we now had air conditioning, so we didn't need fresh air. We now had, electricity everywhere, so we didn't need to have sunlight coming in. And so design of building changed, and alongside of that came the corporate workspace, and people started going to office buildings instead of factories. We kind of somewhat moved away from factories, and we moved into the corporate world where you went and sat in a cubicle all day under air conditioning and artificial lights, because we had this completely, and then buildings just stopped emitting natural light altogether or fresh air. It just doesn't exist. You're in a sky rise on the 13th floor in the center of the building, riding an elevator up and down. You may not see daylight at all the entire week that you're going to work. At the same time, we also had pharmaceuticals, and we had antibiotics on the rise. And so, yes, people were getting sick because they weren't having sunlight, but they could take a pill for every ill. And so those two things, the change in architecture and obviously like the society structure of the working day of man, no longer agrarian at all, and the rise of pharmaceuticals, specifically antibiotics, these two things ratcheted each other. And here we are today where the big pharma or the powers that be are telling us to stay out of the sunlight completely, that it's poisonous, it's going to kill us, we're going to all get skin cancer. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We need the sun. And I'm going to wrap all this up by saying, obviously, we need the sun. It's been like the source of life and energy since the beginning of time, since the creation of the earth. When God spoke it into existence in Genesis, we know that he said it is for signs and seasons in the sky. So we obviously have winter, spring, summer, and fall, and we know, how to prepare for the coming seasons. It also dictates our waking and our sleeping. It dictates the level of cortisol in our blood. In the morning, our cortisol is highest, and as the sun goes down in the sky, our melatonin kicks in. That helps us to sleep, and all kinds of other regulatory functions I'm going to talk about in a different video, because sunlight enters into our eyes and our brain receives an incredible amount of information based on the sunlight spectrum that's going in there, and it sets off this whole array of amazing things inside our body that keep us functioning, in addition to vitamin D and the other got these bugs falling on me, and other things that we've discussed. So that was God's plan from the start for mankind. He put us in a garden, not in a house, not in a factory, not in an industrial or a commercial workspace where we have comfort instead of health. Plant one. And then there's other verses that talk about the sun as our source of healing. And so we need to understand that that was God's design for man from the beginning. And so anything that the let's see, we'll call him the modern priest of science, try to tell us, that we need to do or not do and observe these rituals and not these rituals when it comes to the sun, and stay away from the sun. I'm telling you right now, that's the worst thing you could possibly do for your immune system and for your health and for your longevity and your bodily functions, is to stay out of the sun. Now, your dose is going to depend on your skin color and the time of day and the intensity of the sun. You want to be morning light is really the most therapeutic. So if you can get out, and we know that you're supposed to wake up and let your eyes be exposed to the sun in such a way that all that incredible information comes in and it starts your circadian rhythm, your biological clock. But it's also therapeutic from a holistic healing standpoint, and all of the different reactions and the metabolic functions that it kicks off in your body that help the cells to do what they do best and to heal. So get up, get outside in the morning, avoid those strong overhead hours of the daylight. If you have fair skin, dose yourself the right way. Don't avoid, and don't slather yourself in sunscreen. We can do a whole nother video about what sunscreen actually does and how it's linked to cancer in a huge way. We know all those chemicals are coming through our skin. Many of them have not been tested for safety. Many of them have been proven linked to cancer. So there's ways to moderate your exposure to the sun, but the bottom line, the fact remains, you need the sunlight because you were designed to need the sunlight for your healing, for your longevity, for all kinds of things. So I encourage you to go out. It's called The Healing Power of the Sun by Richard Hobday. It's a very easy read. It's fascinating. It gives you the medical history, which I just briefly outlined here, the architectural history, and then more importantly, it just lists line item by line item all of the things that the sun does for you. And if you want to see it kind of condensed, you can go to my blog, dandelionseed.blog. I have a post on it you can search for and just kind of read it or print it out and just get the cliff notes. All right, talk to you later.